think we're live.
We are. Hello, folks. We already have viewers, too.
We're live on the internet.
From the Microsoft campus.
Yes. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us here at Code It Live. We are your usual hosts, Ed and Sam. However, we are not at home. We are wearing pants today, which would be an awkward.
I have a polo shirt on.
Yeah,
How rare is this?
I can see. So we are actually live from Microsoft DevRel Studios this morning. We are here for VS Live Redmond conference this week, and we thought we will just utilize the time to come and do a nice little stream about things we are excited about.
Yeah, VS Live is a fantastic show. Yeah. There's always a lot going on while we're here, so it's a great time to take a trip up to the Microsoft campus and meet some folks. We've got a special VIP with us today, in fact.
Yes. So before we get started, housekeeping-wise, let us know if you can hear us and see us and do all the things. We are here to talk about Blazor in particular, but you love Blazor, but that's all for web apps, right?
Mostly. Used to be.
Okay.
Used to be. The web is still where I love to be, but it would also be nice to maybe ship a PWA or even get in one of those fancy app stores.
Yeah, the painful world that I live in, which is mobile and desktop. Now Blazor is very welcome. But there's a lot going on the Blazor world just from a web standpoint. Tooling is getting updated. There's a lot of love in .NET 8 coming on. So before Ed and me kind of get into Blazor outside of just the web, we thought we would bring in our special guest, our good friend, Dan Roth is here. All right, Dan, why don't you come over?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hey,
Sam, scoot out.
Great to be here. Oh, yeah.
So Sam, scoot now for a minute. We'll come back with Sam. He's our resident mobile expert, and we'll talk about Blazor Hybrid and mobile and stuff. But to kick things off, Sam, Daniel, you've been busy with your team on a lot of updates with .NET 8.
.NET 8, yes. We've been very hard at work at .NET 8. We just shipped actually a new preview release. .NET 8 Preview 6 just came out. I think it was just last week?
Just last week.
And some Visual Studio updates came out along with it. This is the latest version of .NET. It's scheduled to ship later this year in November. And we have tons of Blazor updates that are happening in this release. Full stack web UI using Blazor.
Yeah, I pulled up the blog post last week, and we talked about it on my podcast, Eat, Sleep, Code. And I said to John, I said, the .NET 8 preview release, I says, mostly Blazor. And I pulled up the bulleted list, and it's like a full page of bulleted items just for Blazor. So what's going on in this release? We've got a lot to be excited about.
There's the .NET 8, that was the .NET 8 blog, top level blog post. But for ASP.NET Core and Blazor, yeah, there's quite a big list right there of stuff that we're shipping. And obviously, this is just the delta from this preview release. This is all these items are part of a larger theme that we're doing in .NET 8, which is enabling you to basically use Blazor for all of your web UI needs. When we originally built Blazor, it was intended to fill this, this hole that you had in your .NET life, like, in your soul. When you're trying to build a web app, you could do wonderful things from the server. You had awesome support for server-side rendering with frameworks like MVC and Razor Pages. You get a request, you generate some HTML, super fast, super performant, great scale. But if you needed to do anything on the client, like in the browser, that meant you were writing JavaScript. You had to use a JavaScript framework. And there are lots of great JavaScript frameworks. There's a new one, I think, every few months. But if you're a .NET developer, that meant switching between different dev ecosystems, tools, languages, frameworks, build systems. And Blazor was originally built to really address that issue. You can now write your client-side web UI code and your server-side code all using .NET, all using C# without having to switch over to JavaScript land.
Yeah, that was always a pain point for me. It wasn't so much the JavaScript code. It was the fact that you're changing all of your build systems and your CI/CD, everything. And I'm used to the nice ecosystem of Visual Studio and the .NET tooling. And then you've got like these two brains you have to kind of keep track of. Two different ecosystems completely.
Switching complete gears. And that's why a lot of customers, companies, organizations will actually have completely separate front-end development teams that specialize in JavaScript, separate teams for their back-end that deal with the .NET code for all that high-performance server workload. So Blazor solved that problem to a large extent. You can now write your client-side web UI code using Blazor components, using C#, still HTML, still CSS. But if you were dealing with UI patterns that dealt with the server, like server-side rendering, then you were using still in the .NET world a different technology. Like we have MVC, we have Razor Pages, CSHTML files for rendering HTML. And we already have support for integrating Blazor into those frameworks. Like we provide tag helpers, component tag helpers, so that you can render a Blazor component from an MVC view or from a Razor page. But it's still a bit of at least a framework technology shift. Yes, you're using C# still HTML, still CSS, but you have to think the MVC way or the Blazor way, depending on which side of the wire you're
still some context shifting that you're doing between the two. Not as big as the whole JavaScript thing, but it's still different.
A little bit, yeah. And I think also the MVC and Razor Pages frameworks, they're not really component-based in the same way that Blazor is. Like if you really want to have a rich UI composition model in those frameworks, you can do it, but they weren't really designed that way. Whereas Blazor is components first. It's all about UI composition. So there's a opportunity there to bring some of that composability, component goodness back to the server. So what we're doing in .NET 8 is we are enabling full stack web UI support using just Blazor. In addition to being able to render your components client side, like on the browser, on WebAssembly, or using that Blazor server pattern where you have a real-time connection to the browser over the network, you can now also just take your Blazor components and render them directly from the server in response to a request. Standard server-side rendering. Once the request is over, there's no state that you need to hold on to on the server, so it scales great, stateless programming model. And then when you need interactivity, you can then light up particular components in your app to use interactive features like button clicks and drag and drop and all those fancy things that historically you've always associated with JavaScript-based development, single-page apps, but now available with Blazor.
And some of it looks really familiar. It has a very WebForms almost like syntax to it. But
wasn't WebForms great? That's great framework,
It actually, for all intents and purposes, is actually fantastic. Look how long it's lived. We still have apps running.
Lots of people still using it. Absolutely.
So should we be concerned that that's the way we're heading again, or is it something that's totally different underneath the hood?
I would hope people would be excited that a lot of the productivity characteristics that you had with WebForms are coming forward now into the modern .NET platform. Again, controls and WebForms, composition, components, basically the same concept in Blazor, an event-based programming model, which is super intuitive and easy to deal with. But we're, of course, learning from the past, avoiding some of the past sins, shall we say, of WebForms, to still make sure that your app is following modern patterns, works with the modern web platform, scale characteristics and such that will still be good. So yeah, if you're a WebForms dev, I hope you'll look at Blazor and be like, oh yeah, this is like almost like WebForms vNext in a sense, if you will. Although obviously not code compatible in any way like that. Like it's still if you have a WebForms app and you want to move to Blazor, it'll be different.
Yeah.
But better, hopefully.
From the API perspective, on the new things that I've seen, there's some things that just feel really familiar though, and it's nice that you can take skills that you already have and continue to use them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's concepts that hopefully will still come into play. There are some things that will be new and different than say like a WebForms app or even an MVC style application. We are, in addition to being able to do server-side rendering, the classic request reply pattern, and having the full-on client interactivity modes, Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, you'll be able to do both of those within the same app, by the way. Like you can have a page that's based off of Blazor Server. You can have a different page or even a single component on the page that's using Blazor WebAssembly because you've decided that part should be pushed down to the client. But there's also a spectrum in between of progressive enhancements that when you're doing server-side rendering can make your app feel more responsive, more smooth and seamless, like a single-page app style user experience, but still being done with server-side rendering. For example, we're adding, we've actually already had this in preview, we are adding enhanced navigation and form handling, where instead of letting the browser issue a full request to the server, and doing a full page reload in order to load the new content, Blazor will actually intercept those requests, navigations, and also form posts, and do a fetch request instead. The page will still be server-side rendered. You're still running the components from the server, but when Blazor gets the updated HTML, it will then patch that into the live DOM, so you don't need to fully reload the page. Your page loads faster, you don't have to re-download a bunch of assets that you probably already have, and it feels much more seamless for the user. It's honestly feels like you're building a spa, like a single page app, even though you're still doing traditional server-side rendering thanks to these enhancements.
Sounds an awful lot like the Ajax model we used to use.
It is, yeah. Like rendering HTML in response to an Ajax request, it is fundamentally doing that under the covers. So there's definitely some similarities there. Another more advanced capability is what we call streaming rendering, where sometimes with a server-side rendered page, you might be doing long-running asynchronous tasks, like you might need to go talk to a database, or you might need to make an API call. With traditional server-side rendering, you have to wait for all those tasks to complete before you can actually fully render the page. So the user browses to the page and it sits there spinning for a little bit while the database data is being loaded or the API call is being completed. And then boom, you get the HTML and now the user sees pixels. With streaming rendering, Blazor will identify where these async tasks are occurring and go ahead and just render the page with its current state. And so you can get like the basic shell of the page and put some loading placeholders for any content that you're going to later render once those async tasks complete. But now the user at least can see that the page is being responsive, things are working. And then when the async task does complete, the component will render again and stream an update to the client on the same response stream that was set up for the initial request. So this isn't Blazor server. There's no like WebSocket involved. Still request reply. You just hold that response stream a little longer to receive additional updates from the server, and the page just updates with the content once it becomes available.
So I could maybe have like a dashboard with different widgets loading in at different times.
Yeah. Like you're asynchronously loading content for different widgets. Initially, you render with some placeholders, and then as the widgets come in, you stream in those updates from the page. That would be totally possible.
Nice. That sounds very cool.
And then, of course, you get to full-on interactivity. You take a component and say that this one should be a Blazor server component. That one over there should be a Blazor WebAssembly component. When you do that, the resources for that interactivity are only allocated for the particular page that you're on. So like I say, you browse to a page that's using Blazor server. That's when the WebSocket connection will get set up. That's when you have circuit state allocated on the server. If you then browse away, well, you don't need that circuit state anymore, so it can be torn down and you save on server compute resources. For WebAssembly, you only need to really download the .NET WebAssembly runtime and related code when you browse to a page that's actually using the WebAssembly runtime, and then it can be cached for future pages. So that's how you can like weave in some interactivity. We hope that this will make it so that, like right now, you kind of have to choose your journey. You say, I'm a Blazor server user. I'm going to build a Blazor server app, or I'm a Blazor WebAssembly developer. I'm going to build a Blazor WebAssembly app. With this new model, you just build a Blazor web app. And then along the development journey, you can then decide where it makes sense to use the server or WebAssembly render modes within your application.
I still get asked the question, so maybe we should clarify a little bit. Like, what are some of the reasons you might want to switch between those things? You mentioned a little bit about server resources and stuff like that. Is the security part of this? The cost of running those services on the servers part of it?
Yeah, there's some trade-offs between the two models. The Blazor WebAssembly model is the closest to traditional JavaScript development. You're going to take some code and you're going to download it to the browser and going to run it client-side on the user's machine. Everyone who browses to your website will be downloading that code so they can see it. They can look at your .NET assemblies potentially and disassemble them or whatever. So that code is effectively public. So from a security profile perspective, obviously you wouldn't want to put anything in that code that is sensitive, like it shouldn't be any secrets or server specific stuff that you want to leave server side. But once it's on the client, it runs completely disconnected from the server. It's going to use the client resources, not any server resources, and any interactions it needs with the server you do with like traditional API calls or gRPC calls, whatever data access pattern you want to use for the server. So that works really great if you want to push load off of your server to the client, like you You want to do something that involves some compute and you don't want to pay for it with your servers, you're going to let the user deal with that. It's also really great for those low latency UI interactions. Like you want when the user touches the screen, or like maybe a drawing app where you're dragging a pen, you want that to show up immediately. With a Blazor WebAssembly app, the code's running right there on the user's machine, so it works great for those patterns. The downsides are, of course, well, to get .NET code to run in the browser, you have to download a .NET WebAssembly runtime. So there's a download size hit and therefore a load time performance hit when using Blazor WebAssembly. It's not a ton, honestly. Like a minimal Blazor WebAssembly app weighs in at about a megabyte after we've done all of our optimizations, like trimming the unneeded code, pre-compressing the files so they're as small as possible. But for some scenarios, that load time hit might be unacceptable, and you really are trying to optimize every millisecond. Blazor Server, for comparison, it leaves all the code on the server. All it downloads to the browser is some framework-provided JavaScript code that sets up a real-time connection between the browser and the server, a WebSocket connection. And then all the UI interactions are now being handled by your server-side components by having Blazor intercept those on the browser and pump them to the server. And then when UI updates happen, Blazor will figure out exactly what DOM updates need to occur, serialize that down to the browser, and apply them to the live DOM.
The size of those JavaScript files you're talking about that are provided by the framework, so small.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of shocked when they're compressed, like how much is going over the wire is just like a few K.
Absolutely. They tend to be light. And then the nice thing about this model is that, well, first of all, if you have code that is sensitive, well, all your Blazor server code stays on the server. So if you have like proprietary IP, like code that you don't want anyone else to see for whatever reason, that stays server side and never leaves. You have direct access to all server capabilities from your components. So if you need to go talk to the database and you're writing a Blazor server app, well, you're already there. You can just like go ahead and talk to it. You should still have appropriate abstractions in place to separate your UI layer from your data tier and all that good stuff. But you don't have to,
like, if you're not planning to have like a web API for something, maybe you don't have like a mobile companion app or whatever it is. You don't need the infrastructure for all that. You just talk to a service that talks to the database. You don't have to write a full web API that's handling, all the response verbs and all of that.
Exactly. Yep. So you can simplify your app architecture in a lot of ways by using Blazor Server. The downside of Blazor Server is it is a connected model and it's a stateful programming model. So every user that comes to your app, they need to set up that WebSocket connection, and your server infrastructure needs to be able to handle all of those connections. That can be a scale-out concern. We provide a service that helps with that. There's the Azure SignalR service, which can multiplex out a lot of SignalR-based WebSocket connections. SignalR is what we're using under the hood.
Don't undersell the ease of adding that, by the way. That is one of the easiest things to set up in your Blazor app. It's like a couple lines of configuration code. The rest of it is in Azure, a couple configuration elements there.
That's right.
But I mean, you don't have to rewrite any code in your app. It's just in your program CS file. You just kind of tell it, okay, this is where all the requests are going to go.
So that'll help with your connection-based scale out. But you still also have state, like that circuit concept that I mentioned, is all of the memory state that's associated with your components that you're maintaining for that user so that their UI functions. That means that you have server resources being allocated for each user as they're using their app. That can also limit the number of concurrent users that your application can handle at any given moment. Now, Blazor Server scales really well by default. Like if you just do like a baseline Blazor Server app and try and see how many concurrent users you can handle, you'll handle like tens of thousands of concurrent users with just like a single normal size VM on Azure. Mm-hmm. But depending on what you're doing, like if you're loading lots of memory into the server memory space in your components, like you're sucking in a bunch of data from a database and just holding onto it with each circuit, then you might hit problems with scale out there. So Blazor Server is basically using your server resources to drive the user interface experience. You also do need that connection to be live. So if the connection goes down, well, now the UI no longer is going to function because everything's being handled over that connection to the server. So you might get user experiences where the client gets into like a disconnected state. Mm-hmm. But for like line of business applications, like intranet apps, where you're only going to have like 100 users, Blazor Server is super awesome. It's
I used
super
to-
super productive.
I used to build a lot of kiosk apps for production on a factory floor. It's like they're hardwired in, they're not going anywhere. Sometimes they're even like behind glass, like nobody touches these things. They're reporting back data from a PLC, something like that. And you need a UI to display charts and statistical information back to somebody that's operating machine. That is perfect.
Be a great scenario for
Perfect
Blazor
for
Server.
that.
I should also mention like there's a latency concern as well. Obviously, every time you click a button in the browser, that has to be sent to the server, handled by a component, and then the UI update sent back. So there's only so much we can do about the speed of light, as in nothing we can really do about the speed of light. So you will have that inherent UI latency on any interactions. So if you need any really low latency UI interactions, Blazor Server might not be your best bet. When we get into .NET 8, now we have just traditional server-side rendering. So stateless, send a request to the server, get some HTML in the response. So you have another option there which has great scale characteristics. Stateless web apps are kind of the tried and true pattern for the web. There's also a last render mode that we're enabling, which we haven't previewed yet, but we've been talking about, which is this idea of auto rendering of interactive components, where you can kind of take the benefits of Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly and combine them together. The way auto works is you basically decide which render mode you want to use at runtime. So you start a component off, let's say you started off with Blazor Server, because Blazor Server will load quickly. Like there's very little to download. You just set up the connection and the UI is now functional. But in the background, you download the Blazor WebAssembly runtime and cache it so that it's available on future visits. And then when the user comes back to that page, the application can detect, oh, look, the Blazor WebAssembly runtime, it's already here. Let me just go ahead and use that. And then you don't need to set up the circuit. You don't need to set up the connection. You save on those server resources. And now the user has a true client-side experience.
There's not that long loading screen for a download waiting.
Exactly. So you load you avoid the initial load time problems. You reduce the scale characteristics of the server, the scale impact on the server. You kind of get the best of both. That's what we call the auto render mode, and that's coming in .NET 8 as well.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, so those are all that's how we are hoping to basically give you a way to build web UI with Blazor without having to transition to really any other frameworks, any other mindsets. You don't have to pick between server, WebAssembly up front. You can decide in the moment where you need it. You don't have to mix MVC and Razor pages with Blazor if you don't want to. You still can. We are continuing to push on providing more integration with Blazor for developers that are already using MVC and Razor pages. We're providing a Razor component result that you can just return from like an MVC controller. So instead of rendering a view, which would be like return view, you can return a Razor component result, which will render a Blazor component instead. That will be an option that will be available to MVC developers. You can use that same result even from a minimal API. Like let's say you just send a request and have a simple little minimal API and you want to render some HTML. You can just return a Razor component result and render a Blazor component. That was also supported in .NET 8.
Nice. So we're going to be talking about like mobile development in a few minutes. How do the changes that are coming in .NET 8, do any of them affect like SPAs? Because we've got these different render modes, like not SPAs, PWAs, progressive web applications. Like, is there any kind of concern there?
You'll be able to use the new features in .NET 8 to build a progressive web app, just like you could with .NET 7 and earlier releases. You'll be able to add the web manifest to make the app installable and add the service workers to make assets available offline. It's worth noting that with the Blazor web app patterns that we're using in .NET 8 are leveraging more and more of the server to deliver a really great user experience. Server-side rendering, well, that requires a server. Blazor, all the streaming rendering patterns, enhanced navigation, these are all server-centric concepts. So if you're moving to a PWA and you're leveraging those server-side rendered features, well, obviously offline is going to be limited in capabilities. Yeah. The full offline story for Blazor is still going to be based on a Blazor WebAssembly-based model, and we will continue to support that as well.
Yeah, that auto mode sounds like it still worked pretty well with the PWA scenario.
At least for the interactive pieces of your app. But if you haven't, for many apps, we expect that the there'll be often cases where a large chunk of your app can actually just be server-side rendered, that you don't actually need any interactivity features for a bunch of your application. And maybe you only have like 2 or 3 pages that are actually leveraging Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. The .NET website is very much like this. Like there's a lot of content on the .NET website that does get dynamically generated as part of the responding to the request. And that's today done all with Razor pages. But after that, there's really not much interaction that happens on the .NET website. Like you're not like clicking on buttons or filling out forms or things like that. So a site like that would be great with the server-side rendered model. But when you go to a PWA, it becomes a little awkward. Like, well, what does it mean? I guess you could take the content and cache it, and then if you're offline, you just show the already rendered content, and then when you get back online again, you can go see, has this page been updated? That would definitely work.
Excellent. Yeah, I think a lot of the apps that we build traditionally are there's more consumers, right? So there's usually some team that's editing data, putting data, doing data entry, and then there's a lot of consumers consuming that data. So I think that the server side rendering, like you said, is definitely the more common scenario.
It's a mix, right? I think modern apps are using a mixture of these approaches. And when we look at JavaScript frameworks, we can see a lot of them are progressing in this way as well. Like you see a lot of what were previously purely client-side JavaScript frameworks, they're starting to say, we could probably leverage some of that server stuff. So you have originally React.js, and now you have Next.js, which has got, React has added server components to their suite of features so that you can render JavaScript components from the server. Very similar ideas. That's in .NET, we've been doing that forever. Like that's our bread and butter. So we will give you a seamless experience for doing both with Blazor and .NET 8.
There's a couple Meteor.js people screaming into their monitors right now because we did this a long time ago.
It's always someone.
There's always somebody that gets there too early, right?
Now, I'm guessing people are probably wondering what's happening with Hybrid. Like, what about Blazor Hybrid in .NET 8? So Blazor Hybrid is continuing to ship and be supported as part of .NET Maui and also for WPF and Windows Forms in the .NET 8 timeframe. So you can use Blazor not only to build your entire web application, but you can also use it to build out the UI parts of your native mobile and desktop apps. If you decide the web platform just isn't enough, it doesn't have enough features for me, I need full access to the native capabilities of this device, Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. .NET Maui does a great job of surfacing those native capabilities, and you can then marry it with a Blazor Webview to render Blazor-based UI within your native client application. .NET 8 includes a whole bunch of quality of life improvements, bug fixes, performance enhancements to .NET Maui to make that development experience even more smoother, more consistent across the various platforms. We are also doing work with the Razor compiler to make it easier to leverage the multi-targeted nature of Maui apps. Like Maui apps are a single project, but they're built like basically usually 4 times, one for each platform that you're targeting: iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac. In Razor files, we're adding syntax and tooling so that you can conditionally compile different parts of your Razor components based on which platform you're currently building for. Like if you want to light up some UI in a Razor component for Android or for iOS, you'll be able to do that in .NET 8. Those are features that are coming. And of course, you'll be able to use a lot of the new framework features that are coming in Blazor, in your Blazor Hybrid apps. Like we are productizing a data grid control. We have a quick grid, which is a basic, baseline, but fast data grid control that you can use to quickly show data within a Blazor application. The new section support, where you can define outlets for content in one component that then get filled in someplace else by a different component. If you've done MVC for a while, you're probably familiar with sections and that whole idea.
Render section and WebForms had, what was the terminology there? I'm trying to remember. I just wrote about this too.
In WebForms? That's fun.
It's very similar concept in both MVC. It's the render section.
Render section and defining the section. Yeah. In Blazor.
Content template. Content something.
I don't remember.
It's been a while, right?
It's been a little while.
I have an article coming out. It is like the soup to nuts article on sections. You think there's not a lot to write about sections? I managed to fill out like 4,000 words.
Like Blazor sections? Like
yes.
The new section?
It is like
interesting.
The one-stop shop for sections.
We had hoped
coming
this was
out on
a
their Telerik blog.
fairly simple feature that, there's a section content and section outlet, but yeah, I'm interested.
You're going to have somebody over-engineer it. No further. So I wrote about this. The sections, they're super helpful because you can build out like multiple templates for your app. So, maybe you want a 2-column template, a 3-column template, but you still want to maybe modify the header and the footer on the main, the root template.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So
okay.
I kind of wrote like, how do you build all this stuff out and still make it discoverable, for a good developer experience?
Interesting. Yeah,
So
that's great.
This big blog post coming to promote that.
So not just the feature itself, but like all the cool ways that you can
What can you do with that feature?
use the feature.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
like beyond documentation.
That sounds really good.
So we've got a question for you, Daniel. I have an existing Blazor WebAssembly app. I hope to use .NET 8 to add a chat feature for users. I guess it's not a comment more than a statement.
Yes, you can do that. Absolutely. I actually didn't talk much about the upgrade case. Like you will be able to take your existing Blazor WebAssembly apps and Blazor server apps, just retarget them to .NET 8, and that will just work. Like you don't have to change any code to move to .NET 8, fully backwards compatible. If you want to move to using some of the new full stack web UI patterns, like there's a new Blazor script file, blazor.web.js, that enables some of these features. There's instead of using a static index.html file in your Blazor WebAssembly app, maybe you'd like to use a proper index.razor component as the root of your rendering. We'll provide guidance and docs on how you can upgrade an existing Blazor application to leverage those awesome features. But yeah, Blazor WebAssembly app can absolutely do chat-based UI. That's something that Blazor is absolutely built for.
And SignalR too. Daniel, when will .NET Conf occur this year? Site hasn't been updated yet.
As far as I don't know that if .NET Conf has been officially announced yet, so I don't want to spoil any thunder from our marketing people. If you're familiar with our history of .NET releases, we definitely are on a yearly release cadence. Like we ship a new .NET major release every year in November. New .NET release comes out. .NET 8 will be our next long-term support release that we're doing. So that's when .NET 8 will ship. Historically, .NET Conf has coincided with that time frame. So that's kind of maybe what we might expect. But yeah, we'll have to wait for the official announcements to come out for that.
So Eric, who asked that question, another person you might want to go poking around is C# Fritz. He usually is involved in this as well.
He is deeply involved with the
sorry, Jeff, I kind of threw the angry mob with pitchforks your direction, but he might be a good source to ask. Do we have any more questions, folks? I think we're good.
Awesome.
So it's a great highlight of what's coming in .NET 8. Where can we get the preview if we want to check the bits out?
So to get the .NET 8 preview bits, just go to the .NET website. Can I do it on here? Can I do it on the...
Absolutely.
Let's go. I'm clicking on such a random buttons on Sam's laptop. Is that okay, Sam? Okay, and then you want to go to the download page, and then you'll see there's this banner up at the top to get the .NET 8 previews. That's
get the latest .NET 8 preview. Now, for 99% of the use cases out there, you can do side-by-side installation on this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Throw those on. I did run into an issue with my Blazor Hybrid app. So there's like a Maui workloads thing that got kind of thrown out of control by this. So
that's why we have
mileage
previews.
May vary. Mileage may vary a little bit. I just uninstalled the preview and it works fine, and then I can reinstall it when I have more time to troubleshoot what's going on there. But check out the bits, throw them on there. If you need to take them off, you just go into the Windows App Manager and just pull it back out
and install it. There is also a way you can get the bits through Visual Studio. If you've updated to the latest Visual Studio preview release, .NET 8 Preview 6 is available as a preview, as an optional component in there. So you can go into your VS install, check that, and that will install .NET 8 Preview 6 for you. The .NET Maui bits for .NET 8 are also available in the latest Visual Studio preview updates, so you can get them from there too. And if you're feeling really adventurous, you can try out the new Visual Studio Code tooling for .NET Maui. We have the new C# Dev Kit, and there's now a .NET Maui tooling to go along with that. So you can try out your .NET Maui and Blazor Hybrid development from within Visual Studio Code if you prefer that lightweight text editor-like experience.
Nice getting started experience in there as well. Like you've got the file new Maui project and all of that in there. With
Yeah,
the,
yeah. So
you know,
there's a
step-by-step
solution explorer.
driven wizard. So it looks fantastic.
Good. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to have Sam come up here and join me. We're going to talk a bit about Blazor Hybrid next.
Sounds
So,
great.
you have your Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor server or .NET 8 United Blazor application. Now you want to target a native desktop application, but continue to use Razor and C# and CSS, and maybe mix in some XAML or some of the native UI stuff. You can do that. That's what we're going to talk about next.
That sounds awesome. Sam is definitely the guy to do that. He knows his stuff. Be sure to give that .NET 8 preview a try and send us feedback on GitHub or through Visual Studio Feedback. We want to hear what your experiences are like.
Appreciate you joining us here today, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed.
All right, thank you so much, Dan. And we'll see you around. We are here at VS Live, so we'll see you around throughout the day.
Absolutely.
And tomorrow.
That was a
Yeah.
great update. Can't wait to see what's coming next.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. All right, so
Welcome,
let's,
Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Let's kind of unpack some of the things that Dan mentioned. I think you can see my desktop here. So this is the announcement for .NET 8 Preview 6 that came out, I think last week. And then Dan's got a whole post on all of the ASP.NET Core updates, which includes more than just Blazor, but there's a lot of Blazor goodness here. These are long and very technical posts, which I absolutely enjoy.
There's the Maui post from
David Ortno.
Yeah.
So .NET Maui, it's continuing its journey to the next evolution with .NET 8. Of course, many customers are on .NET 6 and .NET 7. That's fine. But if you want to be on the bleeding edge, you can run .NET Maui on top of .NET 8. We're up to preview 6 now. So, give or take another couple of previews of .NET 8 before we hit RC or release candidate. And then, a couple of RCs, and then it'll be November and .NET 8 comes out.
David's partner in crime wrote a nice post too, Maddie. She's
Yeah.
got a post all about the new Visual Studio code.
VS Code. So again, it depends on how you want to build your .NET Maui apps. Most folks are maybe comfortable doing Visual Studio on Windows or Mac, but then there are always people like me who like our command line tools, who like the chill mode. It's a lightweight editor. I don't have to do a whole lot of heavy lifting. There's a brand new extension, still, first preview. So some of the, code IntelliSense stuff is still a little light, but they are working on it. In addition to the C# DevKit extension, now you can do the Maui extension, which actually, if you have a brand new machine and if you've never done Maui, this would actually be, good to get started because it brings down all the bits for you, installs the workload. So you mentioned the workloads thing can sometimes trip you up because there are a lot of things going on with .NET Maui. There is, there are Apple and Google and Microsoft dependencies with all these platforms. So you need to know how the workloads work behind the scenes. And that's also getting an update in .NET 8. You don't have to do workloads in Visual Studio anymore. You can get all of the Maui bits down as NuGet packages. So
Nice.
yeah, exciting things happening. A lot of things going on. But the thing that I care a lot about with Blazor, I'm not a hardcore web guy like Ed is, but let me take you to .NET Maui docs, and it is just something that's mentioned lightly, but it just does open up a lot of the opportunities. So if I head to the docs here, you will see eventually in your user interface there is a little thing here for controls. Let's talk about different types of views and how you present data. There's a lot in here, but this one here is the one that really opens up the game.
Blazor Webview.
Blazor Webview. So what it allows you to do is borrow a web view from whichever platform that you're running on, iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac, and be able to render.
So when you say borrow, that means we're going to use like a Chrome-based browser WebView for
If you're on
Android,
yeah.
a Safari-based browser WebView.
WK WebView, absolutely. WebKit. So we are borrowing the web views without any of the Chrome or any of the things that the browser comes with, and just be able to render web UI components.
What's nice about the WebView is you can choose which type of update model, but I think the default is like the evergreen update model. So whatever device you're running on, whether it's Windows, Catalyst, Android, iOS, you're going to get the latest version of that device's OS level browser.
Yes.
and you can expect things to work.
Yeah. So, wanting to have web UI and web things work on native mobile and desktop apps, this is nothing new.
No.
We have wanted to do this forever. And then there have been things that we have done. PWAs are, of course, a great way of, getting started. The whole Electron story, that's been around, and Electron works in a similar way, but it has two, things that are vastly different from .NET Maui. It's a Node.js-based application, so it needs a little bit of boost to start things up, and it ships with a Chromium-based browser engine. So your app package is a little heavyweight, but compared that to Maui, like you mentioned, you are just trusting the OS to give you an evergreen browser.
These things are a little more ubiquitous now. Like, talking just a few years ago, you had to, like you said, bundle a Webview with your app.
Yeah. No,
it wasn't provided by the system. So what would happen is your Webview would get out of date with web standards, and then you would write some new UI code, and your Webview hasn't been updated, so things just fall apart. They break. It's a maintenance issue. That's not the case anymore.
No,
These Webviews are system level now. All the major OS vendors are on board, and they're shipping these things.
Let Chrome, let Edge update their web views, and you'll just get it as a benefit. So what does this mean for us? This is a whole new rendering model and a whole new space in which Blazor can run. So let's go into some of the bits that Ed and me work on, all of our Telerik bits. So if I go into the web component suite like Blazor here, this is 5 years in the making. We have like 150 plus UI
It's about
components.
110 plus.
110 plus, still a lot.
It's a lot.
For modern web apps that shine on any browser. But then you can actually start envisioning bringing this over onto outside of web as well.
We got some heavy hitters in here too. The PDF viewer, Gantt charts.
The really complicated stuff.
Really complex data grid operations with export capabilities and filtering and sorting and paging and all that stuff. We've got the Telerik reporting viewer in there. So all of this you can bring onto a desktop or a mobile app.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are multiple ways in which you can do this. I like showing off some things that the team and actually Ed has built. These are some of our demos that you can play around with. Now, if I pull up one of these here, this is a PWA, by the way. This is Blazor. Blazor is particularly suited for PWAs because all of the UI is already web, and you can have some media queries, understand how you're running. You'll notice here in my browser, I do get this little thing here that says, hey, this is a PWA. You can actually install this, run without the Chrome. Also down here, I get a prompt that says, hey, I'm an app, right? So Blazor is very good at running as a PWA. And then based on how you render things, you can have complete responsiveness. So all of our UI components work just fine for PWAs because PWAs are essentially web apps.
So I'm going to kind of make a point to differentiate two things here real quick, though. You can take your Blazor app, run it as a PWA. It's very desktop-like, but it's still not as fast as a Maui app.
Yes.
Because the Maui app, the Webview that you're using, it has access to, through Maui, the full .NET runtime that's on your machine. So it's not compiled to WebAssembly. This isn't .NET on WebAssembly anymore. It's the full .NET runtime, where on a PWA, you're using the WebAssembly .NET runtime, which is a bit slower. It's not going to be a huge performance hit unless you're doing some really complex work. But if you do have that complex app, maybe you're doing some real-time PDF generation in your app, something like that, you can actually do that on the client now because inside of a Blazor Hybrid app, you've got the full, use of your hardware.
Yeah. So PWAs are completely web apps. They're essentially running in your browser just without the shell. And so performance is a concern, although, like you said, it's not that bad because you're still, doing WebAssembly. But the bigger issue with PWAs is you do not have access to all of the platform APIs. Like you cannot just go out of your sandbox. You are very much a web app.
You have to go through the web's APIs for those things.
It's
not as robust usually. So we do have access to things like the camera. There is some like USB and Bluetooth APIs, but they're all in JavaScript.
You're jumping through hoops.
You're jumping through hoops.
You're in a sandbox.
And you're jumping through JavaScript hoops.
Yeah.
So all of those APIs, whether they do exist or not, they're JavaScript based.
Right. So compare that to a Blazor Hybrid app. This is a completely native app, right? So it's being compiled down to the metal for iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac. In fact, if you look at some of the latest .NET 8 things, they have like native AOT, so it is completely down to a metal iOS, Android, Windows, or Mac desktop application, and all of the platform APIs that you want. You don't need to go off somewhere else. You are literally on the Maui, on the metal itself. So Blazor is not running on a server. Your server and the client are the same place. So performance is just that much better because you're running things natively.
As things like AI become more prevalent in our apps, like this is actually something that's really helpful because you can access the camera on your device and use that to do image recognition, things like that. Again, you can do that in the web, but it's a little more clunky with the JavaScript stuff, and you have to, there's extra steps there.
Let's get into some code here. Let's talk through some things here. But let me show you one more thing here on the Blazor landing page that we do. We have a brand new thing in here. It's called Blazor Hybrid. It's a whole new section that says, hey, now Blazor is now welcome on native and desktop apps. Oh, and feel free to keep the chat room going or bring up any questions as I'm talking. So this essentially means that all of the UI that you see from us, right? All of Telerik UI for Blazor, all of it, and we don't say this lightly, all of it now works on desktop and mobile, right? So that's the promise of Blazor Hybrid. We have some docs here that kind of help you get started. I don't know who this guy is, but the promise is big. Ed's written some ebooks about it, so we can go through some of that content. But the idea is all of the fancy Blazor UI that you use for web is now welcome on native apps with full platform API functionality.
And that means if you run into some sort of issue, whether it's you can't get something working, you're wondering if it's because it's a hybrid app, whatever, you can ping support because it's supported now. You can issue a support ticket, they can ping you back and say, this needs to be configured a certain way or whatever it is.
No, this is big because we spent a lot of time getting this done right so that if you are using Blazor outside of web, now you have official support from us. Our engineers will get back to you if you are having any issues. So let's look at some code, shall we? Let's see what all of this means. So let's open up Visual Studio here, and I'm on a Mac. I will show you some things about Windows as well. But this whole Blazor Hybrid story, essentially, if I just go back here to the top one time, it's not just for .NET Maui. Of course, it works for .NET Maui because it's native mobile and native desktop, but that essentially means you're recreating an app from scratch. A lot of people don't have that luxury because you have legacy desktop applications. Maybe you're running WPF or WinForms. You can still bring in Blazor, and you can bring in our Blazor UI components inside of an app, a desktop app that you may have started 10, 15 years back. Right? Yeah. So that's the big promise. So let's take a look at what this essentially means for us. So I'm going to start with a super simple Blazor Maui hybrid application. So let me bump up my fonts, and here, Ed, let me know if the chat room has any questions here. So what this app is if I do a file, new project, and if I choose, if you have .NET 7 or .NET 8 installed and you have some of these templates, you can see for my multi-platform apps, I get .NET Maui app or I get .NET Maui Blazor app. So that's the one I picked, and then you essentially pick your runtime .NET 7 or .NET 8 and let the template do its thing. So that's what I have. So I already have that project, but I am bringing in a few extra things here. So this is my Blazor Hybrid .NET Maui project. Nothing extraordinary about it, except if I look into my dependencies, let's just choose Mac Catalyst here. If I look at my NuGet packages, instead of just having the usual thing, I have something new in here. That's Telerik UI for Blazor. The reason I'm able to bring in the Blazor NuGet package, that's from us, that includes all of the Blazor UI, is because this project here, since it's a Blazor Hybrid project, if I look at the project file, it starts out with this project type that I understand what a Razor syntax means. I'm a SDK style project, and I know what Razor syntax is. Without this, you cannot just bring in Telerik UI for Blazor into a mobile app or a desktop app, it's going to complain that, hey, I don't know how to render my stuff. But because this is an
the Razor language services aren't there as well.
Exactly.
So you drop the app in, you won't get any syntax, or the file in, you won't get any syntax highlighting, none of that.
No.
Razor file.
And it's going to complain, like NuGet package is going to complain that I'm not meant to be in this type of a project. But here it doesn't, because it already has the Razor services.
Now, I am going to be a good friend and tell you that you are on Telerik UI for Blazor 4.0.1.
Yeah.
We're up to 4.3.0 now. So
I know.
So make sure you update those.
Yep. So with that one little piece of NuGet package that I'm bringing in, and keep in mind, this is the .NET Maui app. In my imports.razor, which is how Blazor gets its dependencies, I can just bring in Telerik Blazor components right there. And then the rest of it is exactly what you do for web apps. Now, envision if you're just doing stuff for the browser, then this is how you'll get started with the Telerik Blazor UI in your web apps. You will just say add Telerik Blazor. That one extension method pulls in all of our dependencies, and you're off and running. In your index HTML, in your Blazor application, this is the pretty standard stuff. You bring in some CSS, which is what is needed for our styling our apps, and you bring in one JS file, which is needed for some of the JavaScript client-side interactions. Again, you don't have to use any of the JavaScript if you don't want, but that's about it. And then in my main page.xaml, which is a .NET Maui construct, if for folks like Ed who are young and they don't like XAML because it gets verbose, I get it. This is all the XAML that you ever have to see, right? It's a content page. It doesn't need to be a content page. It can be a tabbed page or like a detail and list type page. But on a given XAML page, if you drop this one in, that gives you access to the Blazor Webview. That gives you access to that all of the Webview goodness that we talked about. And all we are doing here is just pointing to in the index HTML file and pointing to the first component that my Blazor app needs to run.
I think this is really what differentiates a regular web view from a Blazor web view as well. If you scroll over just a little bit, a regular web view will have the host page property, but you won't get the component properties. You don't have a component type, selector, and that thing.
Yeah, so we are essentially saying load up a whole Blazor application within the shell of a native application, because now we are pointing it to main, which is the main.razor here. This is exactly the same Blazor setup that your web apps use. It's pointing it to the router, so it knows how to get stuff, and then it eventually falls back into index.razor to load up the first view.
That layout view line there on line 7 is pointing to main layout.
Yep, that's right here.
So that's booting up your first UI view.
Exactly. So in my index.html, if you look at all of the stuff that's booting up my app, this is where your entire app is being loaded up. Very similar idea to what Angular or React will do. One div tag in which your entire app renders, and that's what Blazor is doing here. So once everything is done, your main layout is going to come in and say, okay, I know routing. I know the first Blazor component to load up. I'm good to go now. And then by default, it goes to index.razor. You can actually change where it goes. So now in my index.razor, take a look at some of the syntax here. This is meant to be just a Blazor hybrid app, so I can do all of the Blazor components, all of the Blazor things. But because I have that Telerik NuGet package that I brought in, I can just drop in my Telerik UI. So here's a button, here's a barcode, here's a calendar control, a circular gauge control, card control. Every Blazor UI that you use for web apps is now welcome here.
Now, so I did spot a bug. So if you could go back to your main layout.razor.
Main layout.razor.
Yeah. When you installed the Telerik UI for Blazor, you missed one step.
Okay.
So in your main layout, you need to wrap a Telerik root component around the entire application.
Oh, I see.
So Telerik root component, you might not see an error right away, but there are components that use some statefulness in there. And that kind of tells, like, for example, a pop-up component. It doesn't have a place in the DOM. It just kind of appears in front of everything. So what the root component does, it kind of anchors it, and it says, all right, we're going to draw this over everything else, because otherwise it'd be stuck inside of a component somewhere. That lets it bubble up to the top and be shown over everything. So you want to make sure you add your Telerik root component to the...
See, I'm more basic because I don't know some of these details. I'm not a web developer. I'm just going off the Blazor documentation for a simple scenario. So this works, but again, some of the UI components may not work.
Yeah, you'll actually get a console message that says you're missing a Telerik root component. and this thing won't work until you add it.
Got it. But for my purposes, for the 4 or 5 components that I chose, it works fine because I'm not using any of those components. So, excuse me, I'm doing a build here. Out comes a Mac desktop application. It'll be the same exact thing for Windows or iOS or Mac or Android. So all of the web UI that you see for for Blazor now just works on desktop. Now, having said that, some of this still goes back to you. The responsiveness, media queries, that's going to be the same as how your web app handles responsiveness, right? So if you don't have anything in your web app, like we will try doing some with our components, but some of it obviously has to be you being aware of where you're rendering the components.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some decisions that need to be made on what screen sizes you're going to support, if it's going to be completely desktop or you want to support Android devices where they have that thin, narrow, phone profile.
Yeah.
You need to be aware of it. Now, I don't want to get you off topic, but I don't know if you're going to cover this. If there was an error in that app, how do I look at the HTML in the debug the console?
Okay.
How does that happen?
Because
you're in a Maui shell, you can't just right click, hit inspect element.
Okay, let me see. I don't know if this is a .NET 6 or 7 project. Let me see where things are at. I'm going to try to do this on an iOS simulator and see if I run into any issues or if I can, muck with HTML or CSS or JavaScript in any other way. So it's doing a build right now, and I haven't done a iPad Air type build in a while, so it's going to spin for a second to get the build going. And this, by the way, is a very common thing. Coming from native land to web developers, you don't have to do a build for all the things because that really slows you down. So if you look at your project file in here, my simulator is coming up, which is nice and fast. This is a list of all the target frameworks in which your app is being built. When you are doing your inner dev loop, when you just want to focus on one platform, you don't need to do a build for all of them. Turn it off. Just do it for Android. Just do it for iOS or Mac or Windows. And then, hopefully you're not doing things that are very platform specific, and then just turn on more platforms as you need to.
The flip side of that, what's nice is you're in one solution.
Sure.
Like you used to have to write
absolutely.
folders, different projects, something to have each platform.
Yeah.
Now it's just one project, and that's about the gist of it.
All right, so same Blazor app that I showed you. Now it does some of that responsiveness by itself, but some of it is going to be up to you. So here's your Blazor UI components just being rendered on a mobile canvas. Now this may or may not work. Let me see. Depends a little bit on which version of iOS I'm using. Let me see if I can pull up Safari here. Yes, no. I thought I would have it, but this one is not. So essentially what I was trying to say is, web developers are used to DevTools, right? So this is a web app essentially running inside as a native app. So you can absolutely use DevTools. Let me close this down. I think this one is a project that doesn't do this, but I can take you to other projects which do. So let's do that.
I don't know how it's done on Mac. I can show it on PC.
Okay, so we'll get to yours in a minute as well. But let me pull up another project.
We can tackle it later if it's not.
No, let's look at this together.
What's nice is you can attach to that and traverse the.
Oh, you know what? I remember, because in this project, you need to have one more line of code. You need to enable not just the Maui Blazor Webview, you need to have the Blazor Webview developer tools. If you don't have that, it just doesn't show. So now this one here is, let's see, this is a .NET 6 project. That's fine. I can still launch it. And again, you don't need to be doing command line like I am. It's just quicker sometimes to launch. So let's run this on .NET 6 and an iOS build. It's going to grab the default, iOS simulator in my case.
So all of these things running natively, they're in a sandbox, like on that device. So what that line of code you showed does, it kind of lets the app communicate outside of that sandbox and bubble up information that lets a debugger attach to it.
Well, you said sandbox, but it's not the web sandbox. Like it's not a web app anymore.
There's security around.
Sure. But it's an HTML canvas on which you're rendering this. So now with this app running and with that Blazor developer tools, I can now go into Safari, and now I see my iPad Pro, and for some reason, I still don't see my app.
So on like Edge, you would type in Edge inspect in the browser and it'd come up.
Okay.
Don't know how that works in Safari.
Yeah, I was just trying to show you the Safari game. It has to do with maybe debug mode that I did not run this on debug mode. Maybe it was a release build.
But can show it.
Yeah, you can absolutely do DevTools and be able to muck with HTML, CSS, JavaScript while your Blazor app is running.
Because a lot of times you need to see that JavaScript console because if there's a low-level error,
absolutely,
you're going to get that little yellow banner at the bottom that Blazor apps are known for when they go awry. And you don't get, the error happened at the JavaScript level. So you don't get an error message in your Visual Studio console. The only way to see that is in the browser. So if there's not the traditional browser there, it might seem a little confusing at first.
Yeah. Any questions from the chat room? Are we good?
None.
Okay. So let me, talk about something that's a very common thing that Ed and me get asked. So let's go into this project here. So Blazor, it's great for, it's asking me to install Android SDKs, which I don't want to do right now.
Nobody wants to.
No, it's not so bad. With virtualization, things have come a long way. This is a question that Ed and me get a lot. Like, what if I'm already a Blazor developer, right? All of this Blazor Hybrid is trying to welcome web developers into native land, but it doesn't mean like the .NET Maui project, Blazor Hybrid project essentially drops Blazor components inside of your Maui project. While that's good, I don't think it's very realistic because you're not going to let go of your web app just because now you have Maui in Blazor Hybrid. You want to keep serving up your web app, but the same UI should also serve up your native mobile apps, right, or desktop apps.
A lot of modern apps do this too. Like you visit the website, there's either a banner or a pop-up, something that says,
go to the mobile one.
Go grab our mobile app, it'll run better, etc.
Exactly. So this is the same solution that, I'm sure Ed will also show you. This is not something you get out of the box with Visual Studio. Maybe we should create a template that brings this all together.
Somebody should write a book about it.
Yeah, there we go. Ed's just, writing his book. But this is all very doable. So I have one solution here, right? And inside of it, I have a couple of projects. You can add as many projects as you want. So these three web things are essentially Blazor web apps. So all of that is right there. And then Blazor for Native is my .NET Maui app with Blazor Hybrid. Now, the only difference here is compared to the regular .NET Maui Blazor Hybrid template, I don't have a pages directory. I don't have, I do have www if you wanted to, but or not. And the same story is with the Blazor web app. I don't have my pages here. Because the idea is I don't want to have my UI be stuck to either the Maui project or the WPF project or WinForms project or the web project. I want it to be shared. I want it to be really the same UI that I want to render everywhere. So this is where this is a trick I actually learned from Ed. This is called the Razor class library in RCL. So we are adding one more project to our solution to say this is a Razor class library. It's not a runtime. It's not an executable by itself. It's just a library that we're going to bring in. And all we are doing is moving our common things, our common UI, our components, our routing, our styles to that project. And then you reference that project essentially from your .NET Maui app. If you look at my dependencies here, let's look at Mac Catalyst. If I look at projects, that right there is my shared UI. And the same with my Blazor project. It's also referencing that shared UI across multiple things. So it's just a way for moving your shared UI off from Blazor, off from Maui, onto a common project. So with that, I can keep my index.razor here. All we have to do is make sure we are referencing the shared UI. And just the way the app lights up the routers, so you have to kind of point it to the separate assembly to go get it from that main layout now needs to come from that shared UI.
That's the real key to all this right there. I can never remember that off the top of my head. I always have to Google it. Like I know where it goes. I can never remember that line because it is an array.
It is
you have to new up an array and that it's type of
an array of assemblies.
Always very confusing. Again, somebody should write a book about
it. The second time Ed has talked about this book.
It's a drinking game,
but it's nice here because now I can run my Blazor web app exactly the way I have been running my Blazor web app, except the UI is now a part of a separate library. So the browser didn't come up. I can go to localhost 5000 though, And right there is my Blazor
Okay,
app.
we got the web app.
Yep. And you'll notice that this web app here, it's the same Blazor, hello world template, the counter works, but I'm recognizing where you're running, right? I'm recognizing some window dimensions. This is multiple ways of coming to this, but that's actually coming from JavaScript. So
You wrote JavaScript?
I did write a little bit of JavaScript.
Somebody should write a NuGet package that does the same thing.
Another rep for things he has done. But here's the nice thing. So now I can, just switch up where my startup project is. I'm serving a different set of customers who are more on mobile, but I still want to reuse the UI. And this is where, just to kind of prove the point, I like showing off any changes that you make to these, components will be, replicated across web and native apps. Or in this case, like if I go into the CSS, which is now also shared, this is the Blazor button here. I'm writing CSS on stream, which is great. So background color, we'll just make it whatever, green. And we're going to comment this line out. So it's a shared UI. So this will now be replicated on the web as well as native apps. So let's go run this on a Mac or on iOS or on Android. It's the same UI and it's the same styles that are being shared. So that's really nice. So if I go in here, the counter now is green. If I pull this up on the web browser, I might have to clear the cache because the styles are cached, but otherwise it's a green. And now also you notice that I am recognizing where my Blazor app is running. Now I'm running on Mac Catalyst, which is .NET Maui's way of reaching the desktop, and I'm bringing out window dimensions very easily. The way this is done is through interfaces really help. So if I show you my services here, I just have a platform info interface because I'm trying to get to the platform name as to where my app is running, and I'm trying to get to the window size, and then I can have different implementations of this Blazor method for web apps as well as native apps. So I think I find interfaces to be a really helpful thing here. So if I look at the native implementation, that should be really simple here. Because I'm on a Maui app, I already know what platform info is. I don't know about the Wrigley's here that Visual Studio is complaining, but it's all there. So I can just say device info, give me the platform name, give me the main display's width and height. So on .NET Maui, this is easy because I'm a native app already on iOS, Android, Windows. On a web browser, again, there are multiple ways of doing this. On a web browser, again, you have multiple ways of pulling this in. So here's my platform info for web apps. Here we are bringing in a little bit of the browser, and I'm bringing in a JavaScript file that actually gives me the dimensions right here. So browser service goes into the JS interrupt. And again, you don't have to use JavaScript, but just to point out that when you're running Blazor inside of a native container, you still have access to JavaScript. That Blazor.js is right there for you. And that browser dimensions of width and height are actually coming from a JavaScript file, which is somewhere in my root, right there, window dimensions. All it's getting is the window height, inner height and inner width. So JavaScript works, and this is a great way for you to, try to combine multiple Blazor UI components and styles all into one app that serves your web apps and your mobile apps. And speaking of styles, this is something I'm sure Ed would like to show off, but we have a thing called Theme Builder. So this here is going to let you style all of your web UI components for Kendo UI across Angular, across React, and Blazor. So it's for all types of web apps. And I can go in here, open up the Theme Builder application, and let's just say you are rendering a dozen of our Blazor UI components. Here I can go into one of my projects. This is where you see all of the Blazor UI as they would render. So things like, did you have a question?
Yeah, I lost your desktop for a second.
Oh, but looks like it's back.
Yeah, I got it back.
Okay, so envision your Blazor web application having text boxes and date pickers like this, or calendar UI, or drop downs, or tree views, or editors, or grids, and all of this has its own styling, right? So excuse me, you can start with the default styles, but this one has 4 design systems kind of built in: Material, Bootstrap. Remind me what the other 2 are. There's a default, Fluent, and default. So you can start with those base colors, or you can start customizing of your own because of your app needs to look like your app.
Yeah.
And then when you're done,
we have the 4 base themes, and then there's, I want to say about 10 to 20 swatches
Oh, nice.
for each theme. So there's the base theme, and then there's derivatives of that theme.
Yep.
So you can start with those just out of the box, run with, so I mean, 4 times 20, there's like 80 themes already.
Yeah.
So there's that. Or you can come into Theme Builder and you can customize any of those.
Yep.
And I believe there's a swatches panel in here somewhere as well.
I'm not an expert on
Yeah.
this, but somewhere maybe an advanced edit.
Could be. It's been a minute since I looked at there's
Yeah.
been an update. So
Yeah, now and
I think it's under the
there are
little
more.
paint bucket there.
This
that
one.
it? There we go.
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
Not
you can
bad.
start.
Bootstrap dark, Bootstrap turquoise.
So, you
Oh, and we've never mentioned Figma. So for folks who are doing
Yeah.
serious design work,
Yeah,
you're in
it's-
Figma.
behind that menu there. Oh, it's at the bottom of it
Yep,
too.
it's at the bottom, and it's also
There you
import
go.
styles from Figma. So if you have designers who are working with your web apps or now native mobile or desktop apps in Figma,
Mhm.
bring those designs into Theme Builder, and then once you're happy, once you're done, and it's not like a once and done thing, but it's your starting point. You can go back and edit more of this. You hit this big export button, and what I get out of this is if I download this, if I go into my downloads, which I was just trying. So this is my Blazor Hybrid app that I'm getting, and all I get is some CSS and some Sass.
Yep.
So my variables and my CSS, everything is baked in.
Yep. So you can
And-
choose which one you want.
There is nothing stopping me from taking this and just dropping into a Maui Blazor Hybrid app, and all of my styles, which are meant for Blazor web apps, now work on.
If you have it
mobile and
configured
desktop.
right, you drop it in one place. All the different front ends get it.
Or maybe this is a part of your CI/CD. It's part of what you do a build, and you drop the CSS, and it gets picked up.
But it's only referenced in the what do you call it? The Razor class library.
Yes.
You put it in the Razor class library, all your Blazor front ends get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can bring it in through CI/CD, through Sass, whatever you like. And then once it's there in the package, that NuGet package proliferates it everywhere.
Yep, absolutely. Now, I know, Ed, you want to talk about some things as well,
Yeah.
but let me show one quick thing here before we switch.
Mhm.
And let's see.
What do we got here, Sam? You're going into parallels.
I'm going.
The
into
lights are
parallel-
dimming. The lights are dimming.
First. No, I got
There's
Windows
the backup
machines.
generator kick in.
Yeah, no, I got Windows machines under my desk, but look how fast it is. I'm on Apple Silicon. It's not so bad. Because this travels with me. Otherwise, I'll have to remote into my Windows machine that's back at home.
Oh, right.
Not as fun.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to show you all of the Blazor UI that we just talked about for Maui is also welcome. Like if you look at the Blazor Hybrid, landing page that we have, this is our new Blazor Hybrid landing page. Notice it's not just for .NET Maui, it's also for WPF and WinForms. So all of your desktop legacy, I don't like the word legacy because it seems like it's old school, but it's running your business. It's critical to you. So you can bring in all of our Blazor UI components inside of WPF and WinForms as well, which is, again, not to be taken lightly because these are older platforms and they just run fine on .NET 8 and .NET 7 and 6. So let's just do...
I like to say stable
Yeah,
instead of
it is stable.
legacy, but
That's true.
it just puts a little more positive spin on the same terms.
Absolutely. So here is a WPF app, right? So this is running on actually .NET 6. I think this might be .NET 7. So again, the first thing is if you have a WPF or a WinForms application, as you're looking to modernize it, your first step would be what's called the upgrade assistant. Okay, so get it off, let's see, .NET.
Yeah, this is
upgrade
a great
assistant.
topic as well. So
Yeah.
you should do a workshop on it.
Oh, he is just on point here today.
So
Let's talk
September,
about this.
September, I'm going to be doing a workshop.
And
And
so
what
would
we're
I.
going to do in the workshop is
Is
we're
it
gonna
here
take,
anywhere? Do you know?
I don't know if the landing page is ready for the
landing
workshop.
pages are
quite
up. Yep, they
quite
are
yet.
up.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a workshop where we take a WebForms application. We're going
Mhm.
to take that WebForms application, run it through the tool that you're talking about here, the .NET Upgrade Assistant.
Yeah.
So we'll run it through that tool. It's going to help us upgrade the infrastructure for that project.
Mhm.
Now, unfortunately, there's no one-to-one upgrade tool for a .NET Web Forms application view. So you can't take your ASCX file and transport that over into Blazor. There's no way to do that. So we do have to rewrite some of the views, but the backend code, that gets ported pretty easily. There are some things that you have to go through because there's some APIs that don't exist anymore, patch some things in, we'll do that. And then we'll use the Telerik scaffolding tools to rewrite the views in a very short period of time.
Yeah. So mine is called Maui Workshop Migration. I'm guessing yours might be called Blazor, or
I think so.
Or not.
I don't know the landing.
Completely guessing
I think
the
the
URL
landing
here.
page was still being built.
Okay, so in September we are doing two, like these are like half a day type workshops, all virtual. Just come and join us and see us fail from your from the comfort of your couch. But a 4 or 5 hour workshop on migrating your .NET or your Sam WinForms apps to .NET Maui, moving from WPF WinForms and bringing in some Blazor, sharing code between web apps and native apps. So I'm doing all of that on September 8th, and I think yours is like a couple of days
Mine
after.
is September 13th.
September 13th. Now Ed's going to talk about all of the ASP.NET migrations, like from web forms or MVC over to Blazor and modernizing your code base. So we are trying, and essentially what I was trying to say is, if you have this one's a landing page, I would rather take you to the Upgrade Assistant. This page here, they have done a lot of work. This used to be all command line, and this is Alia and their team. Now this is all integrated inside of Visual Studio.
It's very nice.
It's very nice. So it comes down to your dependencies. So if you have a 15-year-old WPF or a WinForms app, if you see that you have dependencies because you are running on .NET Framework, if your dependencies are very much hardcore Windows and they don't work outside of Windows, that may be a bit of a problem, because now you're trying to move to modern .NET, which runs everywhere. And also, if you have NuGet packages where the authors have not updated, maybe it's time you take a look at your dependencies and see if you really depend on it.
Now, there is something called the compatibility package. And what that'll do is, if there are APIs that don't exist because they're .NET, modern .NET doesn't have them, they're in .NET Framework, they're Windows APIs, that package will bring them in. You won't be able to port that to like a Mac Catalyst,
but it'll keep
whatever.
working on Windows.
But it'll keep working on Windows, and you can migrate up to something like Blazor Hybrid, like you're showing here, or just update the version of .NET.
I really like how much this has opened up. Like, this Upgrade Assistant can now be used for moving web apps to the modern world, WPF and WinForms apps, and Sam WinForms to Maui. If you have a WinForms or WPF app and you are wanting to get into some Blazor or Maui goodness, first step is use this to move your runtime from .NET Framework to something more modern, like .NET 6 or .NET 7 or .NET 8.
There's two real big reasons why you might want to do that. One of them is going to be security.
Performance and
Performance is the next one. Performance is a huge benefit of moving from .NET Framework to what used to be .NET Core, modern .NET.
Absolutely. So I have a WPF app here, and if I show you the project file, maybe, so you can see that this one's running on .NET 7, right? So it's a WPF app, but it's been modernized to run on .NET 7. And with that, I get access to some things. So if I look into my dependencies here, so .NET Maui and the Blazor Hybrid story is great, but it kind of needs you to start a .NET Maui project from scratch, which is not very realistic. If you have a really big desktop application, you have to take bite-sized pieces of migrating it. This is a little Webview, and this is a NuGet package that you can install for both WPF and then a different one for WinForms. This will give you the same exact Blazor Webview, except this has got nothing to do with Maui. Right, this is a way for you to just get to that web view. So if I look at my main window.xaml, I am rendering the Blazor web view, except this is not a .NET Maui app, right? This is
Blazor Hybrid, but
it is Blazor Hybrid, not .NET Maui, because now this is a straight up WPF app. All I did was bring in that one NuGet package, but I now get access to Blazor WebView. So if I had a .NET Maui app running on desktop, it will render the same WebView. On Windows, it happens to WebView 2. That's what it's rendering. So this NuGet package will get you that WebView, and I can do similar things. I can not only point to an index HTML, I can actually point to a component, because now it's all Blazor. Now I can bring in my counter.razor Blazor component that's meant for web apps. I can just drop it in my WPF app and it starts working, which is really nice. And now this one doesn't have much styling to it. I think the CSS comes over is what I added, but this is a Blazor component just working just fine inside of a WPF app.
And you could do mix mode here too. You could render some native XAML and have the web view taking up a smaller portion of that view and being interactive.
This is a native WPF view, right? It's a window. So you can go to town and have all of your native stuff. The one thing I will warn you is, like, this is a web view that you're bringing in. There's nothing stopping you from adding a dozen web views on a single view.
Yep.
If you do that, your performance is going to start hurting a little bit, because now it's a web view, a process that you're spinning up for every one of those web views. So just be a little careful. You should not be needing more than one or two on a given UI. So that's WPF. And if you want to bring in Telerik Blazor UI inside of a WPF project, this is your way. Just do the same thing. Bring in Telerik Blazor UI as a NuGet package. Bring in those dependencies, and it'll start working.
What's nice with this though is you can have the web view on a I don't know what the concept of a page is in WPF, but
it's a page.
You can migrate page or view at a time.
Yes, exactly.
You say, all right, this one's going to be Blazor Hybrid.
Exactly.
When I navigate to it, this one's Blazor Hybrid now, and then you can still have all the old ones still working. So nobody's getting knocked off their app they love and use every day, and then you can go through view by view, update those.
You're taking a bite-sized, approach to modernization, because the last thing you want is to go up to your manager or your customers to say, we are rewriting this whole thing. Like, what's the ROI? You have to think about release after release. So like what Ed said, modernize one view of your app at a time.
Yeah.
If you have a team that's doing Blazor already, just bring in that Blazor goodness inside of your desktop.
Another thing that's not great about that, model of, like, you have to freeze the old app. Like, you can't get any new updates because you don't want to have to keep doing that in both systems. So you have to freeze the old one. It doesn't get any new features. And then maybe there's a security thing. You have to go back and patch that on there. And, it's a whole thing. This gives you the ability to migrate slowly and piece by piece.
Absolutely. So here's a WinForms application. Ed and me are a little old. This was something that started in 2002. It's been 20 plus years of running WinForms. It's still very productive, but I can take a WinForms application and I can change up the runtime to be modern.net. And then I can bring in that same dependency that I showed you for WPF, that same WebView, instead of WPF, now it says WebView.WinForms. I'm bringing that in. And with that, I can now drop in that web view inside of any view that I'm doing, and I'm bringing in that counter.razor. Here's my form 1, right? So this is the UI, and this is the designer, and how it works in WinForms. So let me load up the designer here. It's going to take a second, but this is traditionally how we do WinForms apps. It's talking about some scaling, but that is a classic WinForms app, and I've just dropped in the web view 2 in here. That's it. And with just that, it's able to render a Blazor, component, which is, really nice. So here's a WinForms application with a Blazor UI inside of it. And again, if you want to bring in Telerik UI for Blazor, go at it, because now it just has the web view to render whatever it needs.
Rocket Man commented that there's a lot of junk added by the upgrade assistant. I don't know exactly what junk it's adding, but I did notice in my use case, going from web forms to Blazor, there's some things that are added just in case you have web APIs. So it tries to bridge, I can't remember the name of the service it uses. It tries to bridge your web APIs over so you can have a dual-headed, this is the old app, this is the new app, the backend server parts running with web APIs, and they can both be up at the same time, both front ends. And in the scenario I'm using, that piece is completely useless because there's no web API, but it adds it anyway. I imagine these things will get fixed over time. So the best thing to do is, proceed like you're saying, start with a blank app. Don't worry about, that stuff getting added, but do submit a post, in the feedback portal. For that tool, so they know about it.
One thing I will say is both the Upgrade Assistant, be it in command line mode or in Visual Studio, it tells you, you can let it rip by itself where it's not, interactive at all, or it'll stop you every step of the way to say, should I take a backup of your project? Should I do this to your project? It's going to ask you every step.
Yeah.
And if you're confident and it doesn't really mess up, your project's that bad because they are careful not to, change everything up without telling you, then you can skip some of the, things that it's doing just to be safe.
For me, I couldn't skip the part that it was doing that with.
It wasn't
but
there.
yeah, it just assumes it's a web app, so it's going to have a web API, and it adds some bridging functionality there. And it doesn't do anything. So you end up commenting it out. It's not too big of a deal, but it is there.
So I'm trying to be respectful of your time as well, because I know you want to show things. But how about we switch gears to you?
All right.
Because you have some more hard-hitting use cases of doing some testing, maybe. So let me stop sharing, and then you can take over.
All right. So let's see here. I'm going to share my screen, Sam. And I've got a very similar app to what you were working with. I've got what I like to call the Blazor Hybrid app and web in one solution. So I wrote an ebook about this process. So you have a web application that you already wrote in Blazor, and you want to add a desktop and mobile environment to it. So you want to add on some Blazor Hybrid, and then you want to organize your code so you've got everything where it can be shared between the multiple projects. So the gist of it is, we're going to talk about code organization. We've got many, many projects in one solution, but they all have a dedicated purpose. And I let you know what all of those things are. We'll talk about that in a second. How to set up this project and have that web client. There's some things in the index files that I want to look at to kind of show you where WebAssembly stops and the .NET runtime picks up when we're talking about apps that are running natively. And then there's also issues that we deal with Android emulation. Any emulation, really.
Yeah.
So
it's a different VM. It's a different machine. Yeah. It's got complexities. You just have to
in the demo that you showed, it's going to be very similar to mine, but in your demo, all of the data was coming locally from a mock service in the components, where in a real world scenario, you have a server that has a web API on it, and you've got 4 heads consuming that API. If you're trying to run that in a dev environment on your local machine, you're using localhost. Well, when you pull up an emulator, I don't care what emulator it is, it's not running on your machine in the same way that a browser is running on your machine. So you go into localhost and the application goes, I don't know what localhost is. And then you start getting errors from your web API calls. There are some port forwarding tools inside of the emulators that try to help you, but they fall short in other areas. So it will forward some of the information, but you don't quite get the security from that. So if there'll be cross-site scripting problem, you still run into errors, even though it's trying to forward these ports for you. So there's a whole section in the ebook, which you can find at telerik.com/whitepapers. And I'll talk about some of these things.
Yeah, no, the localhost thing is very real, because that's, the moment you start doing native development, you realize that you are talking to different emulators and simulators, which are a different VM. There are some solutions, but there are some hoops that you're jumping through. I'm a big fan of ngrok, which opens up your localhost as a port. And then Visual Studio of late has started doing port forwarding. I forget what it's called, dev tunnels or something like that, which does exactly that. It opens up your local host.
And there's a third option.
Okay.
You can write your own HTTP client. And what the HTTP client does is it ignores some of the security protocols. So you can connect to that local host, and it doesn't run into those security hiccups.
But then on iOS or Android, you have to turn off HTTPS, because otherwise it's going to keep asking you to for security.
So with the piece of code that I have, you don't run into that issue, not on Android.
Okay.
So it's bypassing it through the HTTP client, and not through the device. The device you can configure your emulator to do that, and it is a pain. It's like a lot of XML files, and they have to be just perfect. So there's a section in here on that. We'll kind of gloss over it a little bit, but that's kind of the gist of the project. So it's going to look very similar to what Sam had. One other addition is I threw some unit testing in there as well, because unit testing is a thing. We can test our Razor components, the actual markup that's being rendered, or the functionality of those components interacting with each other. Maybe you want to check and see if something's binding data or it's posting the right values on the screen. Things like that. You can test those in your Razor class library. So when you write a component, you know it's going to work everywhere. So that is pretty awesome as well. So
Ed is just showing off that he writes unit tests and not me.
I have this friend, his name's Eagle, and he wrote this framework.
Yeah.
And if I don't show some unit tests on stream, he will come for my head.
Eagle or Eagle?
Eagle.
Hansen. Okay, Eagle.
So he's from Iceland, Eagle. Microsoft MVP, and wrote BUnit. Fantastic person. So if you look at my Solution Explorer, I've got Blazor Client. This is my web client. So this is going to be the web application that runs in the browser. I've also got a Blazor Hybrid app. This is the one that runs everywhere else, desktop, web, or desktop and mobile.
So is that a .NET Maui app?
This is, yes, a Maui Blazor Hybrid app.
Blazor Hybrid, yep.
Yeah, glad you mentioned that, because you just talked about WPF and how it doesn't have to be a Maui app. Blazor shared. So I have an additional shared. So this is kind of core business logic that is not UI related. It's just business logic that works on all the devices and all.
So is it shared between web, like client and server, or shared across all
shared
platforms?
across everybody?
Okay.
So I've got some interfaces in here. I've got some POCO objects in here. We don't want to declare those twice all over the place. The interfaces help, because then we can hook things up in different apps, and we have that contract there in the shared library. And then we have shared UI. This is where the meat of the application really is.
Yep.
This is where all of our components, routing, all of that lives, styles. So you see my www root folder here is very full of CSS, icons, images, all the things that get shared across all of the user interfaces. Those are in there. All of my pages, my shared within a shared. I don't like the name shared here. I like to rename my layouts, but I digress. We've got main layout, navigation, that sort of thing in there. Our imports file, and then finally, the last project is the UI tests. So you might have yet an additional one that tests your shared logic as well, but I didn't have any logic that did anything in the shared folder. It's literally a POCO object and interface, nothing to test there. So there's not a test folder for that.
Yeah, come on a little inside. You're the main show here.
Am I
You don't
off
want to go off camera. Yeah.
Off the camera a bit. So I'm testing my fetch data component in here. So we'll take a look at that one in a minute. Let's dive into some of these other things first. We'll talk about tests last. One thing I wanted to point out, you didn't get a chance to do, Sam, inside of the hybrid and the client. So the web, Blazor web application and the Blazor hybrid application, we have www root folders.
Yep.
These are going to be a little more sparse because everything else comes from the shared component library. So all the CSS styles and all of that belong to the UI library. So we don't see any of that in here. What we have is index HTML in both locations. Now you can't share the index HTML file.
No.
There is one very specific line in here that is going to change the way your program works. And that is going to be down at the very bottom. So if we actually pull these up, let's stack these up top and bottom so we can see them really good. This one and this one, pull up that same last line. Notice the difference here.
So which one's the native app? Which one's the web app?
All right. So the top one is the native app.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom one is the web app.
Yeah, I see.
I can tell because the script file here says
Web
framework Blazor Webview.js.
Yep.
So this is a specific file that is going to boot the .NET framework for the Webview. So it's going to look for your device's implementation of .NET. So if you're on Windows, you're going to get the .NET runtime for Windows. So WinRT, whatever runtime.
And also it brings in the JavaScript interop between .NET and Blazor to talk about JavaScript as well. So that I think is the bridge for all Maui apps.
So this is going to boot you up in the correct environment. So if you were to put the other one, if you were to try to share this or something and ended up with the WebAssembly JS one, I think it will work, but you're still going to get WebAssembly.
Which you don't want.
You don't want that. You're sacrificing performance for no reason.
Yep.
You're getting nothing positive out of it. It's all loss and no gain. So there is a difference between these two index files. That's why we keep them separate. For the most part, everything else up here at the top is going to be exactly the same. This is going to be just locating your resources from that shared UI library that you have, that Razor class library, grabbing your CSS files, any JavaScript interop you may or may not have, pulling it into those applications. So I just wanted to point out that those two are very different just because of that one line. But again, no pages, like you said, no pages, no shared folder, no Razor components in either of these apps. They all come from that
shared UI
project. So there is that. So let's go ahead and run this guy. Let's see if this
on a
compiles. I'll try to throw it on a pixel. This might be some time for us to fill. Okay, it actually went fast, but okay, it says it's loading up. The first run of these can sometimes be a bit tricky. If you hit start on your Blazor Hybrid app into an Android emulator, and for some reason it doesn't start, try it again. This hasn't been as much of an issue since the tools have been updated. Earlier on, this used to be kind of a known thing. I don't run into that anymore, but it does take quite a while for your Android emulator to spin up and the first APK to be built and deployed to the device. So additional runs won't, they'll be quick like that. The first time, don't panic if it seems like it's taking a long time. They can take a long time. But as you can see, this is all my Blazor application, nice and snappy. It's all being shared from that one shared UI instance.
Yeah. And right there on the weather forecast screen, like if you wanted to get the user's geolocation, you can, because you're right there on the device. You're native. So all of the .NET Maui APIs are accessible to you.
Now, I want to mention something else here. Notice I've got the web and the emulator running. I do have the server going.
Yeah.
I loaded it ahead of time because if I were to shut the server down, let's see if that actually does it. We go back, fetch data. It's still picking it up from some cache maybe.
Yeah.
The trick to getting the localhost bit working. Now, first thing is you'll notice an error on the fetch data screen if that server isn't running. All it's applying is the data, just JSON data. It's not sharing views, no HTML is being rendered by the server, none of that. But it is supplying the JSON data. So it'll open the page, it'll say loading, and it'll get stuck. There's a couple ways you can configure this, but one of the easiest things to do is just go into your project that has the server, right-click on server, you're going to scroll down to debug. You can start with or without debugging. Typically, I do without debugging because I'm working on the front end, not the back. It will load the page up. Don't kill it because it might close the server instance from running. But once that's running in the background, you can come up here and hit start. Or you can do .NET run. You can come back over here. You can start it from over here. But you want to make sure you start your server first and it's running in the background. Otherwise, you're going to get pages that fail. And you're going to be like, what's going on?
And also, people might have like a web API on a separate project, altogether that serves up the same APIs for data to your web apps and your native apps. So however you want to do it.
Now, you're going to need the book for this next part. I can't do this off the top of my head. It's too much code. There is a place in the book to get a link to the code, and it's also written out in the back of the book in a code section.
Fifth time.
You will need the ebook for this next part. Again, on the device, let's try hitting this here, just going into the Chrome browser here and just do local host. And if I do localhost, it doesn't know what a localhost is. So how are we getting to localhost from this emulator within the application? Because it's got to ping an API. So if we actually go into the UI component, we go to fetch data, you can see it uses an iFetchData service. Okay, so what is iFetchData service doing? Well, in each instance, whether I'm on the client or the hybrid, I have an implementation of that service. So I have fetch data service here. This is for the hybrid application.
Oh, you're building up your own HTTP pipeline to serve it up.
So, well, we have to have HTTP to begin with because it's going to a web API to fetch data. That gets passed in through dependency injection, okay? But you are right. I am building my own HTTP pipeline that will get injected in here.
Yeah.
So this is pretty routine for any HTTP service, though, that you're going to build. It's going to be HTTP client gets passed into this service. It doesn't matter what the implementation of that HTTP client is. It just needs one to run. So it's going to use one, call, get JSON, async, get that weather data. Now, this is where the tricky part comes in. You're going to have to get this code, again, from the ebook through that link or copy paste it however you want to get it. There is this dev HTTPS connection helper. Now, again, it doesn't know where localhost is. There is some port forwarding happening, but it's not enough. It's going to have security issues that you just either have to over configure for or find, like ngrok is a great solution, does all of this as well. Or the Visual Studio tool, DevTunnels. Those will circumvent this, and replace it. This is the other method of doing it. I won't explain all the code, but it basically says if it's on Windows, we're going to use the normal localhost. If we're on Android, it's going to go to the forwarded port. Mm-hmm. And then it is also in here going to drop a bunch of certificate checks that it does.
Yeah,
so we're bypassing certificates here. This is not something you would want to publish to your
you're going
production.
You're going hardcore.
But it's necessary. So you either have to use, there's three things: ngrok, tunnels, or this. Okay, so this is the low-hanging fruit, though, because you can just copy paste it in your project and you're good to go. You don't have to configure anything beyond pasting this in and making your HTTP client. But you can at least see what it's doing. So it's ditching it's bypassing, it's patching in the SSL information instead of trying to get it. And then I wrote a little helper in here, so you can easily just call add dev HTTP client from your dependency injection. So if we go up to Maui program, you can see in here, and then there's an if-def. If it's debugging, then use the add dev HTTP client. And then there's logic inside of that HTTP client that says, all right, you're on an emulator. We're going to go to this port instead of localhost. We're going to put our, shim in our SSL information. So you think you're getting a valid SSL connection. It needs to be inside of this debugger statement. You don't want to publish that again and have somebody bypassing SSL, and it's going to go to the wrong port anyway. So there's that. So once that's injected, it gets then injected into the service by dependency injection.
And this, by the way, is new because you have always been able to do this for Blazor applications. .NET Maui has dependency injection built in, which WinForms did not.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's just the generic .NET build host, and you can bring in
Yeah.
dependency just like that.
Yeah, this is something that ASP.NET
Yeah.
like really broke ground on and brought to the .NET world, I think.
Mhm.
This whole dependency injection solution is just elegant. It works. And that's where you're going to need it for getting that emulation with localhost. It's chapter 7 in the ebook. Mention it one more time, telerik.com/whitepapers. Go grab that. Code's in the back of the book here, which looks like this listing. You'll see it in there. Again, it's on a gist as well. You can go grab it off of that. But that was the main headache for me, because I'm a web developer. I'm used to, we'll just run the whole ASP.NET thing. I've got my web APIs and I work on my front end. And then I got into Android and I'm like, what are all these errors? I have no idea what they mean. You look them up. There's a million solutions that are, 10 pages long. This one, you just copy paste in, you're good to go. So there's that. Unit tests as well. So I've got unit tests in this project. Again, they test for the shared library, which is used everywhere. So it's kind of a one-shot. You get tests for everything. So this is what unit tests look like in Blazor. I'm actually using just mock in here as well, and some other tools that are really handy. So we can mock a data service. So again, we're going to run on the server. We're going to run on WebAssembly and Android and all of those things. This might be a different implementation across the board, but if I have a service, I can just mock it, throw in some data, and work with my component.
What's the fact attribute?
So this is XUnit.
Oh,
So very similar to the way MS Test works. I think it's test method or something like that you decorate the other ones with. Fact is just going to say this is a unit test. This surfaces it to the test runner, lets it know it's a test to run. BUnit, however, is very brilliant. If I inherit this test context, I can call a render method on it. Notice this is a Razor file, not in a CS file. This is a Razor file, so I can just write HTML Razor code right into the test. So I can render my fetch data component, and then I can go traverse just like I would in the DOM and find elements in the component and verify that they're there.
Oh, I see.
So I can render the whole fetch data component. I can take inside of that rendered fetch data component, find an H1 tag, and verify that the markup is a heading tag with the words weather forecast in it. Very helpful. I can also attach to instances of components and look at their properties. So that can be also helpful.
And this will work just fine for .NET Maui because the UI is the same visual HTML tree is what you're entering.
Yep. So this one's called a theory, which is a same as a fact, but you're passing in some parameters to it and doing multiple tests sometimes at once. And then I have another tool in here called AutoData. What AutoData does, it looks at the properties for an object, fills them in automatically with intelligent data, so you can go through your tests and make sure that that data exists and maybe data binding. So that's what I'm doing here. My fetch data component has a table of data that it's bound to. So first thing is I'm using Telerik JustMock. And I'm going to say for the fetch data service, when I call get weather forecast async, I'm going to create a task, and I'm going to use this array of forecasts. Where does the array of forecasts come from? Okay. If we look up at our test method as a parameter, that is an array of weather forecasts. This AutoData attribute sees that and goes, I'm going to create an array of weather forecasts that have unique values, and it fills it up. Then it passes it into JustMock, which then says when somebody calls this method on this interface, I'm going to give it the values that were created by AutoData. So you don't have to create a fake, data set. We'll render our fetch data component, which uses the weather forecast interface, or the fetch data interface, what I call it here. internally, which then renders that in the table. So we go find the table element, and then we can use Razor code here to make sure that table element rendered correctly. So it should match a table that looks like this. And notice I'm using Razor here to iterate through those forecasts that were generated by Autodata. So I'm saying the forecast elements that were generated by Autodata, are they the same ones that were given to the fetch data component through the service? And they should match, because we're essentially doing, we're essentially rendering those directly out into the component.
So question, I see that you have the, unit tests, but do you have like test runners on different devices?
You only have to run tests for, if you're just testing the UI, you just run the tests for the UI test project. So if we do that, and where did my tab go? I always lose this guy. If you do lose it, you can just go up to search and say test runner, and it should just pop up. Where are you at?
It's Monday.
Test Explorer.
It's
there
Monday
we go.
for Visual Studio.
Test Explorer, not Test Runner. So we just come up here, we'll hit run, and it's going to run through those tests and test out those that fetch data component. And the fetch data component gets used everywhere, so it just got tested for 4 platforms.
Yeah, you are actually, going around some of the things. Like if this was pure native XAML UI, especially on .NET Maui, you would need some specific test runners for different devices like iOS or Android. You can bypass all of that because your UI is just HTML.
Yep, and that's what BUnit's essentially doing. Is BUnit has some rendering logic under the hood. It's a very, very brilliant library. And it does also something that you don't run into on those native devices, and that is semantic comparisons. So if you look at the code that I have here, let's try to get this out of the way, but not get rid of it completely. There we go. For example, I have a class here. It's gonna look and make sure that it has the table class on it. What if you have multiple classes on an HTML element? Like it's table, and then maybe it's highlight or something like that. If you swap those class definitions in CSS, browser doesn't care. The order doesn't matter. So if you were to do a string comparison on table highlight and highlight table, it's going to fail because they're reverse order. BUnit looks at those and goes, the browser doesn't care, so it passes. So it's got a semantic, HTML semantic comparison tool inside of it that helps deal with that type of stuff. There's a lot of little nuanced things the browser doesn't care about that BUnit is going to help you with, where if you were trying to do this like at a string-based level, it's going to be a nightmare. So we've got unit tests in there. So what if we want to add some Telerik stuff?
Ooh, okay.
All right. So let me throw away any changes I might have here because I've got it in the same project. We will jump over to another branch. So I've taken the same project and I've upgraded it with some Telerik stuff. Hopefully changing branches doesn't blow up the build here. Sometimes I might have to reopen the project for this to work right. Let's pray to the demo gods and make sure that doesn't happen.
So how did you bring in Blazor or Telerik UI?
Right. So one of the easiest things to do, you're going to run into a necessity for that Telerik dependency in a lot of places here. Even though the library is in the shared UI library, that's where most of the components are being used, you still need to have the dependency in the consumers of that. So you want to add the dependencies there. There are server components to the Telerik UI for Blazor. They, like, for example, if I have a data grid and it has paging, sorting, and filtering on it,
Of course, yeah.
I might want to use that metadata on my server in my web API, so I don't go to my database and fetch 10,000 records at a time, but I only get the 10 records that pertain to that filter operation in that page. So what the data grid does is you can actually grab the metadata out of it and run a extension method and it passes all that metadata up to the server, where it catches another extension method, passes that off to Entity Framework, queries only the values that you need out of the database. Reminds me of my favorite scene from Spaceballs. Take only what you need to survive. Grabs only what you need to survive out of the database, pass it back down to the view. So you want them there as well. So what I just do is I go into tools here, and I say manage NuGet packages for solution. And then in manage NuGet packages for solution, you can hit many projects at once. So let's see, I don't remember, I might have to actually install something for you to see this. There it goes. So you get this UI. You can come in here and just slap it on all the projects, or you can come in and hit just the ones that you need, which would be client, shared, and server.
So you're bringing in Telerik UI for Blazor inside all of the projects.
You need it in all of them except for possibly the shared one.
Sure.
In my case, you wouldn't need it in the shared. There may be some necessity for it to be there. I don't see why, but just in case, you could add it. So there's that. I mean, there's other things that like PDF processing and things you might want to add. So it depends.
All right, let's see some Telerik UI.
All right, so let's see. We want to run server first because we have some APIs that it's going to hit. Again, if there's errors, that's always what I check first. Make sure my server is running. So we'll do start without debugging. We should be able to pull up the browser-based version of the application. And I've got some really cool stuff in here that pertains to mobile, Sam. You're going to really like. Deploying, is it in the browser already?
Yeah, it's saying I'm listening.
Is that, yep, this is the one. One really nuanced thing that most people wouldn't notice, but as a designer / developer, I do. So I have nice SVG icons in my navigation over here. So these are coming from the Telerik library. So these are our brand new SVG icons that are being rendered by the SVG component. Can't really tell by the button too much, but there is a Telerik button that I'm clicking. You can see the grid though. So no more plain data output here. This is a nice rich UI grid. And we have sorting, filtering, editing capabilities built right into the component. So we can edit values. It's a little cramped on this tiny screen. I wonder if I can, there we go. That's what it would normally look like. We're smaller screens here for streaming, makes things easier. So if I were to edit that, you can actually see the editors in place and everything.
So all of this is Blazor UI. It's meant for the web, and it's working on your browser. But show me the same.
We could export. Hang on, one more.
Okay.
One more.
Oh, you got a form.
I got a form.
All right.
What's nice about the forms with Blazor in Telerik UI is I can pass it a model, and it can take and output a form based on that model for most things. The drop-down boxes, however, these it can't auto-generate drop-downs yet, but it can auto-generate things like text inputs, numeric inputs, date inputs,
Calendar,
stuff like that. But you can mix. You can say generate everything from the model, and what doesn't generate, you just add. Okay, so you can have a mixed mode there. It's not all or nothing. So that's really cool. But drop-down boxes, like that's not really a friendly thing to mobile, right? Let's try to run this on mobile, and we'll take a look at that view on mobile as well. So get this one up and running, and
you hit debug, not just debug without, or build without debugging. So
yeah, so it might take a quick second.
It's going to launch up all the symbols and everything.
It's going to load that up. While it does that, like let's go back to the grid page for a second, and we'll do a little responsive action here. So this is using another Telerik grid. So then we have two grids. We have the data grid, and then we have a layout grid.
Oh,
so one is for layouts, one's for data. The Telerik grid layout is very much like the XAML grid. What do they call it in XAML? Is
grid.
Just grid. Okay.
So rows and columns, you get to adjust how they render.
So the markup for that is actually very similar, which is something that's nice about that component. So if you're familiar with XAML, you can use that. If you're familiar with HTML, you can just use HTML and CSS grid. But if we look at our grid component here, we have the Telerik grid layout, and we've got an 8:4 ratio for our columns. I don't know what the squigglies are doing. Everything runs. It's just Visual Studio being Visual Studio, I guess. But yeah, everything's inside of that grid layout. So there's no CSS and stuff here. You just put the component in, drop your components inside of it, and set your parameters.
It looks kind of similar to XAML. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
XAML as well.
So there's that. And you can see when I change the screen, the left-hand or right-hand sidebar dropped beneath that. So there's a Telerik media query in there. What you can do is say, when you pass this breakpoint, breakpoint being like a certain width, it's going to trigger an event. You can use that event for anything. Most of the time, you're just setting a flag saying, this is a large device or a small device. And then you can adjust your column widths. And that's what I did here. Instead of having two separate column widths, you just put one value in there. That's going to say, all right, just render everything in a big tube. I also use that to trigger turning off some of the grid features, so it's a little bit easier to manage on a mobile device. And we should be able to see that here as well. So if I come into the grid page, look at that. And we've got virtual scrolling here too.
Nice.
All running right in the mobile device. So there's desktop, there's mobile, same view. Check this out. This is where the real magic is though, Sam. I love this part. If I go over to my form, all right. So we've got first name, last name. We've got these two drop downs here, preferred team. If I hit preferred team here, look at that. That's much more touch friendly. So now we've got.
Is it the same UI though, or did you have to change anything?
One little property is set in there, and it's set once.
Okay.
So I'll take and show you that, but I want to show one more thing first. Check out the date drop down.
Yeah,
so we get a nice date
desktop
picker here. Desktop, go over to mobile.
Yeah, nice.
Right. Show you how to do that. So we'll go over to, it may just be because this is running, so I'm going to stop it just so we don't see all the squiggly nonsense, hopefully. I'm going to go over to my form component, and it's still there. Visual Studio didn't like the fact that I changed branches is what it is. But if we look at, sorry, it's on our form inputs. I didn't have to rewrite any of the code. It's not like a per device type of thing. All I'm doing is setting this flag.
Adaptive mode.
Adaptive mode. If I set it to automatic, it tells the component to look at the screen size and render according to that screen size. So many of our input, or all of our input components have this, and some of our larger components are starting to adopt this as well. So you'll see this.
So you don't have to do any media queries. It's one Blazor component that just knows how to render itself adaptively.
Yep. So if you look at all of our input components, you'll see this on them.
I like it.
Yeah, and they render that nice input for those devices. And it doesn't have to be an Android device. If I go over here, I'm still on a browser, but maybe it's a mobile browser.
On the width.
I still get that, and there's a little bit of something with the. It's what do you call it? Something with the sidebar possibly that's throwing it off a little bit, but you get the idea. It doesn't matter if you're on a web desktop or mobile, it's going to pick the right.
Off the viewport and the width that it has. Nice.
Yep. So
so all of the Blazor UI from us is starting to be very welcome on mobile and desktop.
And then you mentioned theme builder as well. I won't go through you showed theme builder off pretty well, so I did that earlier. And since everything in this app boils down to the shared UI folder here, you drop in, you go into your theme builder, build your theme. I called mine demo because we're in a demo. Drop that CSS file in your shared UI. And then you do have to go touch the index files and let them know where that new style sheet is. I've got mine nicely commented out for demo here. So if I comment out the pre-existing CSS file and drop in the new one. The main thing is finding the location for it. So it's going to be your class library name,
Yep.
the folder, and the file. So if I do that, and I were to go back and rerun the server app because it's faster to boot it up, we can say debug. And you'll see the buttons and things change color because I built that with Theme Builder, dropped it into my project. Now, any of those 4 front ends that I run,
Just pick up the style.
Safari, Mac, Windows, Android, or the browser, all those platforms get that new gold orange button
Nice.
for the UI because Theme Builder makes that really easy.
Yeah, good stuff. We are, we have some of our good friends in the chat room. Rocketman is saying, I'm loving this stuff because I see myself writing a lot less code. And that's the point, right? You're trying to really share Blazor UI code across web and native apps. And not just the UI components, but the styles as well.
I forgot to show one more thing, Sam. I'm going to try to get it really fast. We mentioned earlier, how do you debug the browser and like the console and things? On Edge, you do Edge / inspect, and it should show.
Or you can connect to a device.
Yeah, it normally shows right here.
Yeah.
There it goes. And you can
nice, yeah.
just hit the inspect button down here. Notice it says, let's see if I can zoom in here. Webview in company name, my hybrid application, hit inspect on that. It pulls it into the browser.
Nice.
All right. So there's the web view now, and it's in Edge. You can do it in Chrome. You can do it in
this is a
Safari as well.
A nice thing Edge has.
So if there's that yellow banner at the bottom of the screen, you can jump in there and hit the console. Notice I do have a 404 for a fave icon missing in there, which there isn't a use for in this, so it doesn't matter. But if you had the JavaScript error or something, this is where you would debug that.
Sure.
And you could also traverse the DOM elements and see what's being rendered.
It's all web, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just running inside of a native simulator or desktop in this case.
That is really cool, being able to do that.
It's very powerful.
So you mentioned it earlier, you need that one line of code that says add web developer tools, add developer tools, WebView developer tools in your program CS file. Once you have that, you come to your favorite browser, pull the inspection panel up, however you do that. In Edge, it just happens to be Edge whack inspect. I think Chrome is almost identical because they're basically the same engine, right? You get that device listed out, you just tap on inspect, and there you go.
Yeah, good stuff. Our good friends Aztec, thanks for hanging out with us. Really appreciate your time. It's complimenting us and more so you for this stuff. Something that Aztec was asking, I don't know if you know, Theme Builder, it's great for me to start out with any of those 4 design systems or styles and then start, manipulating. But can I bring in a CSS? Do you know?
You could so you can't really import CSS into Theme Builder. It's just kind of a one-way generation tool. But we did support in the past. So there's 2 versions of Theme Builder. There's a brand new version. It's like Theme Builder 2.0 almost, the one that you're seeing now that has the pro version that you can upgrade to. There was a legacy Theme Builder, which recently got sunset. That one had a metadata that it would build and let you import. For Theme Builder,
Maybe it's
the
coming,
new version.
Because we actually have some of our engineers with us here. We'll take this feedback to them.
I don't know if you can still import the legacy ones. The normal workflow, though, for most designers is going to be Figma.
Yeah.
So the workflow is starting to go towards, what most people are using.
I get that, but I also see Aztec's point. Like maybe it's not one and done. Like your same designers go back and they want to change something. They want to start with the existing CSS that you have.
Another thing is.
Oh, what was that?
I was going to show. Oh, you're still on there. Okay, cool. I was going to say, pull me back up so I can show. The other thing that Theme Builder Classic or Legacy non-supported anymore version didn't have was projects.
Yep.
You went into it as a new project every time, therefore you had to import to edit. Now there is a project, so you wouldn't necessarily import anything, you would come into your project and continue working on it. You can export the metadata from it. Now, don't recall what it, okay, so it is a JSON file.
So maybe it's just a matter of, opening up the import as well.
The feature may not be
if
here
it's
yet.
JSON, then, it can reread that JSON back up.
Or I don't know, it could be up here. Import metadata. There we go. So it is there.
There you go. It is there.
Okay.
So Aztec, yes, you can. Because that JSON is going to include all of your styles that have been pre-built, and then you can, suck it back in and then continue working on it.
Yep. So there's the
Good
import
stuff.
export there. I always forget the property panel is
Yeah.
up here.
Yeah.
There's a nice little tutorial thing that darts you around when you first start. And I do the typical developer thing and it's like docs, burn, cancel, skip it. I know what I'm doing, right? But there's font management. You can share. Depends on what your what do you call it? Your
admin or permissions.
Permissions and what your
roles you have.
Your tier of subscription is.
Okay.
You can share these with teams and things like that. Certain features are lit up depending on what you've purchased.
Sure.
But there are things inside of this panel here that let you share, rename, import, export, delete the project.
I don't know. Import moved up there. Nice.
There we go. There's your different tiers.
Now, Ed has mentioned his Blazor Hybrid ebook a dozen times by now, but I could not have framed this any better. You
What
got
ebook?
your question here. How do you get your ebook?
Okay.
So please do share for the 12th
I
time
usually
now.
just give the top level away because there's just so much goodness there. Telerik.com/whitepapers. And then it's really easy to find right now because it's the top of the list. But there is the Blazor Hybrid in One Solution ebook. There is also a lot of great stuff in here. So that's why I always give away the white paper URL, because you can learn about PDFs in React or the Learning Blazor ebook release number 4, which is a full ebook written by David Pine from Microsoft, learning Blazor from scratch. The entire ebook is here. You can go buy it, which is also nice. Support our friend David. Go buy it on Amazon. It's about $40, or you can come here and you can download it for free.
Jeez. Okay. All right.
Whichever path you choose is fine with me. David Pine is a great guy. Go support him. Buy his ebook.
Yeah. Aztec is saying we'll check it out, but we're all going to go read Ed's ebook first before we check out other things.
There's so many good books, and they're all written from different perspectives. I'm talking about David's ebook right now, but not this afternoon, but tomorrow, we're actually going to be giving away another author's ebook here at Visual Studio Live.
Bring up the URL.
Yeah.
That's our good friend Jimmy Engstrom. His ebook is up there as well. Oh boy, I don't know the name of the book, but if you do a search on Jimmy Engstrom Blazor book, I'm sure it'll come up somewhere.
I know his is on Amazon as well. This is probably it right here. So, like I said, there's lots of great ebooks out there. There's a free one up on our white paper site. There's mine free on the white paper site. There's the Blazor Hybrid App in One Solution ebook, also free on our site. We're going to be giving away some of these at the Birds of a Feather lunch at VS Live. So we brought, I think, about 30 copies with us. It's first come, first serve. But if you're at lunch, you can pick one of those up, or you can go buy those on Amazon. And then there's yet another ebook by, I'm trying to remember who wrote this one.
Bottom line, there's a lot.
There's 3 really great authors out there that have books on Blazor.
Yeah, chat room is thanking you for the pointers. Anything else? I think we got to be conscious of people's time. We can keep going for a while. Ed and me like to chat. But
do you want to see if we can raid? Like, that's a thing, right? Twitch TV.
who's on? I haven't noticed off late.
So we've got, who can we raid?
Who's on?
Let's see, raid channel. If we do raid channel, we've got our Chicken Life.
Let's do Lana.
Lana, or let's double check too. I rated her last time. See if anybody else is on too. I mean, she's doing great stuff on Unity. It looks like she's the one today. We'll go ahead and raid Lana Lux with our folks here. So we'll prep for that. Any last words, Sam?
No, I think this was fun. We normally stream from our home offices. This was nice to actually come out and do something where we are standing next to each other. We are on Microsoft campus for this week. Just happened to be the studio happened to be open, and it's a good place to be. We love being out here. Big thank you to Daniel Roth for stopping by and getting us going. A lot of exciting things coming with Blazor in .NET 8, and all of that goodness is now welcome to native mobile and desktop apps. So
you got to show off our little guy that we adopted too. He's got like the Blazor gear on today. He's got a power glove. I mean, we really took over the studios here, which are now the DevRel studios. Used to be Channel 9.
Yep.
Remember Channel 9? We're starting to sound old. Sam Monday, it was Channel 9. It's now DevRel Studios.
Hopefully you can see that Ed and me are excited about the possibilities. I think Blazor is, understandably, exciting for any .NET developer. Web, front and back Blazor, and now you can bring that goodness to native apps as well. And I think Blazor, be it for Blazor Hybrid, is a particularly nice way for modernizing your desktop apps. And if you love any of the UI that we make, all of that now works on mobile and desktop apps.
Yeah, and don't forget to check for our workshops as well. We mentioned that a while ago. If you're just joining us, we've got 2 big workshops coming up in September. Just visit Telerik.com. We'll have announcements there. We should have an all fits.
This is a great question
for all of those.
While you're pulling that up, Rocket Man, Clippy. We all remember Clippy,
Yes.
fondly. DevRel Studios, where we are at Microsoft here, they are, adorably renaming themselves with their new icon or new mascot called Clappy. It's not Clippy, but it's more like for the clap when you record videos. So it's Clappy now. It's really fun.
I don't know where we should have like a landing page with all our webinars, but I can't seem to find it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in September.
Oh, there it is.
Promote,
Telerik.com/webinars.
Oh, you
can
got
go
something
there.
Here?
Yeah.
Let's add that
Go ahead
up here.
Telerik.com/webinars.
Yeah. There's
there's the
web one, and then the
migration from WebForms to Blazor, or .NET, ASP.NET to Blazor, and then there's Sam's migration to Maui.
Yeah.
So make sure you check those out as well.
That's about it.
That's it. Let's go ahead and raid Lana Lux now.
Yeah, let's do that.
So she's doing some game dev.
I'm getting hungry. I'll go.
She's doing Unity. I need to watch her show. Like, that's something I need to pick up on Unity. Let's talk about this with John Bristow. Like, all the AR VR stuff, doesn't matter what platform you're on, right? Whether you're on the new Apple Vision Pro, whether you're on the Meta Quest 3, 2, 1, pretty much any desktop platform.
They all run Unity.
They all run Unity.
Yeah.
Just learn Unity.
Yeah.
Like, this is where it's at. So this is the person to go watch for that. So
Go
say hi to Lana.
Yeah. All right, folks, that's it from us. Bye-bye.
3, 2, 1.
Or not. We're still here.
And raid. There we go.
All right.
You can close this out, Sam.
Should I end the broadcast?
Yep.